Hey everyone, welcome to the next video of this series. This one here is the introduction to Grasshopper, focusing on lists and basic data. So let's open up Rhino. Okay, and assuming you have watched both ModeLab and the David Rutten Intro to Grasshopper, let's jump into our first exercise. So type in Grasshopper on your keyboard and hit enter or spacebar to run the command, and that'll run the Grasshopper plugin. I'll do a quick run through, a very high level sort of overview of the first two tutorials that I've asked you to watch. One thing that I think that they missed out on, which I will go through, is how to preview your script and what some of the components mean in terms of the preview. Okay, so this is what we call the Grasshopper Canvas. Obviously across the top you've got your toolbars. You can see my toolbar is quite packed, so if I change that to text, all the names here are all different plugins available to you on Food for Rhino. So these are all free plugins that I've installed that allow you to do various different things. So for example, you've got Ladybug, which is for your solar environmental analysis. Weaverbird is for mesh modeling. Pufferfish is just a suite of tools available that allow you to do some interesting experiments with geometry. Lunchbox is an excellent tool for panelizing, for envelopes and facades and structure, etc., etc. So as you get better with Grasshopper, you'll naturally start to explore some of these plugins. Now, you've got your tabs across the top, and then within each of these tabs, so for instance, in the params tab, we have these components, and they're called containers that allow you to contain geometry, either referenced in from Rhino or from within Grasshopper. So I know that David Rutten's tutorial goes through this, but what I want to do is explain to you again just briefly what the different colors of these components mean. If I go to the Rhino window and get a point and put a point on the canvas, I'm going to delete this geometry. I'm going to double click on the canvas and type in point. So this is a point container, and it allows me to reference in a point from Rhino. So you right click, set one point, click on the point in Rhino. Now you'll notice that from the point that I put down to the now reference point, one's orange with a bubble that tells us that the point component failed to collect data, and that's because there's nothing inside it. You can see here there's an empty point parameter. So if you hover your mouse or your cursor over the component, it'll tell you what's inside. So for example, on the component that I just referenced the Rhino point into Grasshopper, you can see it says reference point. It's now gray, which means it's happy. Another example is if I duplicate this again, you can see that within the Rhino where there's a point, I'm going to make a duplicate and I'm going to hide the original point. There's a red cross. That red cross denotes the location of that point, but it's actually showing that within Grasshopper. So if I click on the component, it'll highlight it green, and if I unclick, it'll be red. I'm just going to reference this second point that I duplicated into this component, and I'm going to hide it in Rhino. So I'm going to select it, type in hide. So now we have 2 points. We have two light grey components, shows where the points are located. So if I click on this component now and right click and turn off preview, you'll see it's gone dark grey and it's no longer visible in Rhino. And the last option is to make a third copy. I'm going to turn the preview back on so you can see it. But what I'm going to do is right click on it and go and click enable, which what it does is actually disables the component. And now you can see it more or less grayed out. And when you hover your cursor over it, it tells you that that the point parameter is empty once again. So these are kind of your four main preview options. You have a component that shows up orange, which means it's missing information or that there's an error. So you hover over the bubble or the balloon to see the message. Oh, and the fifth would be if there's an error. So if I tried to, so let's try, if I make a line using these 2 points, and I put the line into the point component, it comes up red. And hover over the balloon, it tells you that the component failed to convert the line to a point. And that makes sense. So if you hover over the end here, it tells you that the output is a line segment, and we're trying to put a line segment into a point segment, which isn't going to work. If I bring down this curve component and plug that line into the curve, you see it's happy, and if I click on it, it highlights green. Now, not sure if you picked up on it in the 2 tutorials that I've asked you to watch, but in Rhino, a line is also called a curve. So if I'm in the Rhino window and I type in curve, I can draw what AutoCAD would think of as a spline. But I can also type in a curve and just click from A to B and hit spacebar, and that will give me a straight line. And just to confuse matters, I can also use line as a component just to draw a straight line, and polyline as you'd expect to draw a polyline. But polylines and lines and curves can, in most instances, work across each other. There will be, in some cases, where you try to put a line into a curve component and it won't work. But you can see in the description there it says line like curve. Okay, so we have orange, which means it's empty, light grey, which means there's something in there and it's previewing, dark grey means there's something there but you can't see it. So if I click and turn preview on, you can see now that we have 2 points either side of the line. Again, light grey represents a line. If I click on it, it goes green, and then red means there's an error. And you've got to hover over the balloon to see what the error message is. That's more or less previewing the script, or at least understanding what the colors of the components mean and what they represent. Up in the top right, we have 2 main options. So one is on the left side of this vertical bar is a draw shaded preview geometry, which means anything that's grey, light grey that is, it'll show on the desktop in Rhino's viewport. And if I click the green and grey button, it allows you to only preview geometry that you click on. So if I toggle that, now you can see everything has disappeared in this viewport, and you have to actually physically click on each component to turn it on and preview it as a sort of step-by-step. Now this is actually a really great way to work if you're downloading a script online and you want to start to reverse engineer it and understand what they're doing, or if you want to find parts in a script, you can just do a select and highlight, and you go, okay, there's a line, let's work out why, and then you can start to break down the script. And in this case, I'm holding Shift to add to my selection, so you can build the script up from the start through to the end. Okay, so let's double click and let's hit the key under your escape button. I don't know what it's called, but it's that little, with Shift, it's that little squiggly line. And that allows you to type in text. So if you type in preview the script and hit enter, that'll give you some text that we can use as a label. Now let's move on to our first exercise, which is understanding a basic list. Let's select the text that we just put down, go Control-C, Control-V, bring that down and type in basic list. So it's really important to keep everything labeled and organized inside your code so you can understand it and anyone else can understand it too. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a circle or two circles, and I'll use that as a way to demonstrate how the list structure in Grasshopper works. So let's start by creating a point, but instead of putting a point down in the Rhino viewport like we did here, let's make our own point inside Grasshopper. So double click on the canvas and type in construct point. And we want this one here, the XYZ point construct. Alternatively, you can go to vector, point, construct point, click on it, and then bring it down to the canvas and click again. Now you'll see by default that this component is already grey, which means that there's information inside it. So if I hover over the X, the X coordinate is 0, the Y coordinate is 0, and the Z coordinate is 0. You need 3 inputs or 3 coordinates to construct the location of a point. Assuming you guys understand sort of basic modeling software, in 3D you have 3 coordinates. Follow my cursor down to the bottom left. You have X, Y, and Z. And so to create a point, we need to have X, Y, and Z. And by default, there are zeros in each of them, and that puts a point at the origin, which is 0, 0, 0 in Cartesian space. Let's say I want to be able to move that point. We can put 2 sliders down. Let's just put a number, say 5, and let's pull that into X. What that does is that moves that point 5 units across. In this case, I'm in meters, so I've moved 5 meters across. I can Control C, Control V, put that slider in Y, and now you can see I've moved in the Y direction 5 units. Another way to duplicate a component is to click on the component you want to copy, hold Alt and drag, and that will give you another slider. Let's put that into Z. We can't see anything because I've still got my preview on for selected objects only, so I'm going to deselect that, and I'm going to go up here, select everything, and hit preview off. So now all we see is the point we've created for our circle. Now if I go into 3D, you'll see that that point has a height which is determined by this Z location. Great, now we have our point. I might actually put this here, and that way you can see the top view and the perspective view. Now we need to construct a circle, so double click, type in circle. Now there are a few options that come up. Before we select any, let's have a look at what they are. So this one here contains a collection of circles. Anything that contains exactly that, it's a container. It means you can't create a circle, but you can put a circle inside that component. And containers are usually represented by these black hexagons. And you'll see that here. These are all containers and they all have a similar aesthetic. For a circle, we can create a circle by 3 points, a circle by a center, normal, and radius. What we want is this standard, create a circle by a base plane and a radius. So click on that. Base plane of a circle, we can use this point to locate that base plane, and you see up here that that circle has just jumped across. So it's located at 0, 0. That's because the default is the world XY. If I move this output and put it into this input, it'll jump and relocate that circle with that point in the center. And now I can move the point and the circle follows. And it, again in the Z direction or with the height. And the next input, so hover your cursor over the R and you'll see that it asks for a radius. So we need to input an integer or a number into this input. If I want a large circle, I can say give me a radius of 5. So I double click on the canvas, hit the number 5, and that's a shortcut to give you a number slider, and then hit enter. Put that into R and now you can see that the radius has changed. And if I pull this slider, you can see I can parametrically update and modify the radius of that circle, as well as the location in the X, Y, and Z. The next thing we're going to look at is dividing this circle into a series of points. If you can remember from some of the earlier examples you would have seen in David Rutten's tutorial, he divides a curve, which is a squiggly line. We're going to do the same to a circle. So double click and type in divide curve. Hover over to make sure this is what you want. So divide a curve into equal lengths. Cool. Let's click on that. So our output is C, which is the circle, and he asks for a curve to divide. Despite this being a circle, it is still technically a curve or a line. So I can put that C into C, and you can see now that it's gone from being orange to light grey, and a number of points appear on our circle. That's because there are some default inputs already within this component. So by default, the number of segments is 10, and that gives us 10 points. Let's put a slider in to be able to adjust that. And I'm going to say 5, put that into N, and now we have 5 points. Again, it's parametric. I can dynamically change that number of divisions. I can change the radius and the location of that circle. And the last thing I want you to do is double click on your canvas and type in point list. And this is a way to preview the order or the numbers associated with each of these points. So get the P output and put it into your P input for points. And it's hard to see at the moment, so let's make that size a bit bigger, and we'll go with 1. See how that looks. Nice. Okay. So we can see that each point has a number from 0 to 8. And lastly, I'm going to put in what's called a panel. Panels are a great way to visualize the data. And I'm going to take this P output and put it into the panel. And what you're looking at here is a list. Now, the first thing that I want to bring to your attention is that this list starts at 0. And you can see that here too. It's really important to remember that when we're talking about lists in programming, we always start at 0. And that's for any programming language. The next thing to draw to your attention is that we have asked for 9 segments, but our list finishes at 8. Now, obviously, we started at 0, so we do have 9 indices, but it goes from 0 to 8 instead of 1 to 9. So just make sure you remember that so you don't get caught out. These numbers in brackets in here are the coordinates in Cartesian space that locate each point around the circle. So number 0, which is this guy here, is located at X, 8, Y, 5, and Z, 6. Now we know that our base point that drives the location of the circle is at 6, which is why our 0, or all our points, should be located on 6, which you can see here. That's because they're all set at Z height 6. If you keep an eye on this number, while I change this coordinate, they will change, because the height of that circle is changing. The 8 represents the X direction, so we have X on 5, which is at this intersection of that underlying grid, and then each one of these is 1 unit, so 6, 7, 8. And that's more or less what these numbers represent. It's the coordinates. The numbers on the left is what we call an index number. And then these numbers at the top right is the data tree. Okay, so to better understand what the index number means, let's get ourselves a list item. you can either go up into the Sets tab, List, List Item, double click and type List Item. Input parameter L failed to collect data. What does L ask for? You hover your cursor, it asks for the base list. Let's put our points into L. Actually, we'll leave our circle on number 0. And the reason for that is item index says 0. I'm going to copy and paste this slider and put it into index. Now keep an eye here on this green dot or green cross. As I move this number up to 1, that moves over to 1, to 2, 3, 4, etc. Now what's happening here is we're basically calling out that point, a point from this list based on this number. So in this case, we're asking for index 4, which means that we have retrieved the fifth point in that list, which has this coordinate. And if I want to demonstrate that, have that point isolated, we can use that to draw another circle. So bring a circle onto the canvas and pull that point in. And now you can see we have a circle around that point. As I move this slider around, each number that we have isolated has a circle around it. Copy and paste this slider, change the number, and we're going to now isolate 2 of the 9 items. So before you input that into I want you to hold Shift, and you'll notice the cursor has a green arrow with a little plus icon, which means you can add that to that input. And now we have 2 circles because we're isolating point 2 and point 4. And I'll do it one more time and input. So we have 3 circles. Now, I hope that makes sense. So we've basically created a point that determines the center point of a large circle. And then we've divided that large circle into 9 points, although that is a variable. So as I reduce the number of points, we get less on the circle, and as I increase it, we get more. And then I'm isolating 3 of those points based on these numbers. And in this case, it's not working because I'm trying to isolate number 7, but there isn't a number 7. So if I bring that down to 6, you'll see that that now corresponds with my 3 numbers. Working with this first definition that we've created, I'm going to now ask you to delete that. I'm going to get you to select everything, click on one of the components of the green, and then while you have your left mouse button down, press Alt and drag to make a duplicate, and then change your Z coordinate. So we have 2 circles that are directly in line in plan, as you can see here, but have 2 different heights. I'm going to right click on the points and disable for both of them, the preview. And here you can see in my perspective view, I have isolated 3 points using the list item on the first circle and the same on the second circle. Now using a line component, create a line between 2 points. We have a list of points here and a list of points here. Connect them both and you'll see we now have 3 lines. I can change any one of these sliders and you can see that the points change. I'll put this preview back on. And I'm going to put my cursor over these 2 and select them so you can see what's moving in green. If I move this slider, you can see that that shifts. Okay, so we've got this strange little pattern going on between the two. And I like to just reiterate the parametric component of this. I can go back to the very start, which is the location of this center point, and move it. And that moves the first circle, but everything else is still connected. If I do the same with the second, so I can go back to the beginning, I can change the form, the location, the size, and no matter what I do, those lines will remain connected. And okay, that's the end of this exercise, which is just a short introduction into understanding the preview options and basic lists. See you in the next video.